That is a good point. And, let me ask David Robert, I'd love your thoughts on this conversation regarding engagement. And also, do you think that there is this correlation between culture and revenue? Have you seen it?
Sure. So my first thought is, we're using terms like culture, strategy, engagement, sometimes satisfaction. These are all very different things, related but different. When I think about culture, and I don't want to impose my definition of culture on others, but when I am working with clients and talking about culture, it's really about getting really clear about the values, beliefs, behaviors, the rituals that are normally conducted in an organization that guide how we get the work done, not what we work on, how we get the work done, which ultimately will influence an organization's performance. So again, just a subtle difference between what versus how. But in terms of the correlation between a strong culture and revenue, I would challenge that a little bit, because you can have a horrible workplace environment and make a ton of money. There's lots of examples of that, right? So when I'm working with clients, the goal for my client is to establish a long-term, sustainable environment where you have continued positive financial outcomes, coupled with a high level of resilience, so that when you are faced with a challenge, you can move through that challenge far more efficiently than your peers can. So that's the way I define kind of the correlation. And at the Great Place to Work Institute, our model is built around trust. So when we're doing research, we're really researching the correlation between trust in a workplace and financial outcomes. And the research is overwhelmingly, across the globe, overwhelmingly clear that organizations where people feel trusted and they trust the people they work with, a high degree of respect for each other, they feel valued, and they have opportunities for growth, they are far more likely to take the mindset of an owner versus a squatter in an organization. And that, to me, really is what's driving continued profitability and financial outcomes and lower voluntary turnover. Because when you have an owner mindset, you're far more likely, to Sally's point, to feel engaged, and engaged employees are far more likely to release their full suite of talents into a firm. They're far more likely to look for opportunities for process efficiency, for broader collaboration. They're just paying attention because they care about the firm. And that's the mindset that's going to position a firm to be able to compete against their peers, as opposed to a renter mindset or a squatter mindset, where they're still maybe adding value, but they're not creating vast amounts of discretionary effort, which you need to compete. And they're certainly not being proactive and looking for ways to take care of the firm. And so you think about what mindset is going to benefit an organization long-term, it's the owner mindset. And we know from research that you are far more likely to adopt that mindset if you exist in a culture of trust.
Right. No, I think those are great points. But what happens when you are at a firm and they're bringing in laterals and they're bringing them in all the time? And they've come from a different place with a different culture and a different ethos. Very often you have to say no to certain behaviors that they may have had because that's not the way things are done at our firm. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that? And let me ask David Robert again, what happens when you're bringing these large groups into a firm?
Sure. And I would love to get the other panelists' perspective on this as well. But so this is why it's so critically important that firms pay attention to culture. So there's really two scenarios. I'll simplify here with two scenarios. Scenario one, a culture that has a unintentional culture, right? So they haven't really spent a lot of time really defining what the norm should be, what the behaviors are that are going to guide our work. And in that scenario, when you're bringing in lateral hires or graduating students from law school, right, just as the first time job, what's likely to happen is that there's no way to vet the alignment between those people and what your aspirational culture is. So you are likely to invite leadership styles, behaviors, rituals, practices that will prove to be problematic for you, for the firm. And which obviously impacts the bottom line, because you have to get HR involved and you have to do coaching perhaps. And there's there's a lot of conflict that gets ginned up in those scenarios. As opposed to scenario two, where let's say you have a firm that has a very clearly defined culture. They are very clear about who they are and how they're going to conduct their work. There's two advantages to that. The first is they have a framework to vet the alignment of those lateral hires against their predominant culture. So that's the first thing. The second is they will know what interventions that are needed to acclimate those new hires very quickly, and to say no to behaviors, rituals, and practices that they understand will eventually be problematic. That's one point. The next point, really, and I think this is critically important because I see clients make this mistake all of the time. So oftentimes when you are bringing in lateral hires, you're bringing in partner levels, right? So who have large practice areas or large portfolios, lots of revenue associated with those acquisitions. And if you do bring in somebody who proves to be problematic or in contrast to your culture, the mistake that clients make is they wait too long to correct the issue or say goodbye to that person because losing that revenue is just too hard a pill to swallow. And but in strong cultures, in cultures that have been acknowledged as leaders in terms of trust and collaboration and mutual respect and fairness, they are more likely to say no to those types of issues.
So saying no ends up being a very big part of leadership and being a big part of culture and maintaining a culture. It's what you say no to as well as what you allow.